Well, hello. I'm Kyle Pickett. I'm the music director and conductor for the State Symphony. I'm sitting here with my friend, the composer Dan Pinkston. Dan, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here.
And the reason that we're doing this little video interview is because we are in the State Symphony doing the world premiere performance of Dan Pinkston's First Symphony.
That's right.
In November. And so I thought I would talk to Dan a little bit about the work, and we'll give you a little bit of a preview on what to expect in November. I'm really excited about this.
Me too.
I'm really excited about this. And I guess the first thing I would say or want to ask is your first symphony.
Right.
Now, you've done other orchestral pieces,
Right.
including one that we played
A couple years ago.
a couple of years ago.
Right.
But this is your first
Right.
full-length symphony.
Exactly. And with full, sort of the size of orchestra, first time I've ever been able to work in this medium. I've written a lot of choral music, a lot of chamber music, but it's a pretty exciting opportunity for me.
It's really exciting, and I've heard a lot of your other pieces, and so one of the interesting things when you're doing a commission of a new piece is that you don't know what you're going to get.
Right.
But I have a sense of what else you've written and what you've written for us, and so I had a sense of what you're doing. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the piece itself?
Right. Well, it's a symphony that's like many traditional symphonies in 4 movements, but the movements flow together without much break, so it almost feels like one large whole, which I think is going to be interesting for people. It's actually quite beautiful and quite dramatic, so it's not modern in an abrasive way, but it is still very much of our time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a piece that's going to be easy for people to listen to. There's going to be a lot of motives that listeners will like and will recognize that will unify the piece. So
and when you say motives, you mean tunes? Right?
Yes, I mean tunes.
You mean
yes.
tunes that people will be able to
hum,
hear and
yes.
hum.
Yeah.
Well, actually, there are a couple things that I want to ask you, but I'm going to stop there for a second and say, one of the things when I talk to people, audience members, about our concerts and our season and what the symphony plays, I hear a lot of, I don't mind hearing something new, but I don't want to hear something that's just dissonant or jarring.
Right.
And now, I actually think that the current crop of young composers, yourself
Right.
included, and last year we did a little Lieberman piece.
Correct.
You guys want the audience to like your piece,
Absolutely.
which that's a little bit of a change.
It is a big change. Yeah, I think younger composers love traditional sounds, triads and chords that we recognize, and they like melodies and tunes, and it's just how they put them together that may be new.
Right.
How the piece
Okay.
flows that may be different.
So that brings up the next question, which is, the symphony is a very old form.
Correct.
I mean, 300-ish years old. And so why write a symphony?
Right. Well, actually, when I approached writing a symphony, I was pretty fearful. I mean, it's this great tradition that is very humbling. So I took my time studying the craft of composition. I haven't attempted this before because you don't want to do this lightly. And you don't
Right.
want to, there's so many great masterpieces, so many talented people have worked in this medium. So I really studied the history of the symphony. I looked at Beethoven, looked at Brahms, looked at Mahler, at Shostakovich, and then I also sort of waited until I found my own voice,
Mm-hmm.
my own style that I felt like could work in a symphonic form.
Right.
And why write a symphony? I mean, it's the same reason why people still write plays or still write books. There's something new to be said
Right.
in a genre, even if that genre is old. You're
Right.
still writing poetry.
From my perspective, from the conductor's perspective and the performer's perspective, I think one of the important things that the symphony does is give structure to a piece of music.
Right.
There are, of course, wonderful tone poems, and we think about things that Strauss wrote, more than 100 years ago,
Right.
or ballets. We think of Petrushka or The Rite of Spring, or some of the more dramatic forms. But still, the symphony gives structure to what we're doing.
Right.
And so, did you find that helped you, or was it more of a help or a challenge? Because the last piece you wrote for us was more of a tone poem.
Correct.
So this is now within a structure.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, you have to always be mindful of not just where you are in a particular bar of the music, but the overall form, the overall structure. You have to keep that big picture going. But I like it because it brings instrumental music to a higher level of it's music is organizing itself, not a story or a book or a play, but there's actual dialogue of the musical material.
That actually brings up the next question: is this symphony about something? Do you have a program? I mean,
it's not.
It's not.
No,
Okay.
It's not a programmatic symphony. There are a couple of quotations in the symphony, meaning tunes that I didn't write that sort of show up, but they're not really. They don't really have specific meaning.
Okay.
They're fun and beautiful and dramatic, but they're not supposed to tell us any kind of secret.
Now, sometimes composers will say there's no program,
Right.
but there really is a program.
So I'm telling
So are we
you the
gonna?
truth.
You're telling me there's no
I'm
program?
telling you the truth.
Okay. So we won't find a program,
No.
as we're
No.
doing this. So it's what we call absolute music,
Absolute.
which is the music is about the music.
Correct.
Kind of like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which is about ba-ba-ba-bum.
Right.
I mean, that's what that piece is about.
Right.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about the musical style of this piece. What do you know, I hate with new pieces or with composers to say, who does it sound like? But
Right.
who does it sound like?
Right.
I mean, I know you have people who influence you as a
Right.
composer, so do you have a sense of, I mean, obviously it's going to sound like Dan Pinkston,
Right.
but are there qualities or
Right.
things that,
You know, I purposefully chose to be influenced by Dmitri Shostakovich.
okay,
When during the months preceding writing this piece and as I was writing it, certainly didn't copy him,
right,
but I tried to let the way his ideas flow from one to another to sort of influence my writing, just because he's such an established master who was able to create works in the modern era, in the 20th century, that people liked, the not just connoisseurs liked, but
Right.
the average listener actually enjoyed listening to.
Well, actually, I think that's really important and really interesting because Shostakovich, I think, is really probably the most successful symphonist of the 20th
That's right.
century.
That's right. Absolutely.
I mean, if we look back at the 19th century, you're full.
many.
Yeah, I mean, you've got so many. You know, Schubert, Schumann, Brahms, of course, Tchaikovsky, up through
Right.
Mahler, and of course, in the mid 19th century, you even had a sense. I mean, there were people who felt that the symphony was done as a genre. I mean,
Correct.
you had Wagner and Liszt saying, no, you got to go in a different direction.
Right.
But we go on and we get to Mahler, and then in the 20th century, we get Shostakovich, who was definitely influenced by Mahler.
Absolutely.
I mean, certainly influenced by the way that he orchestrated, the way he used the instruments of the orchestra. But he was able to include really modern sounds in that.
Right.
And so you're kind of taking that on into the 21st century.
I think so.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's a really interesting way to go.
Right. Right.
Can you tell us any special features? Anything that any instruments that are featured, or any particular ideas that?
Yeah, something that would distinguish, a composer like myself in the 21st century often is our use of percussion.
Right.
Where percussion instruments are used not just to highlight climaxes or whatever, but they're actually, sometimes they actually deliver the material, the motivic material or whatever else. So I use a lot of percussion. I use gongs and cymbals, castanets, jawbone of an ass, which is a fun one to use.
That is a fun one to use.
And
now we don't have a jawbone. We tried to find a jawbone
Okay.
for the Lieberman, and so we had to use something that's equally fun, which is the vibroslap.
yes.
So
yes,
we will
that'll-
probably use the vibroslap
Exactly.
once again. So.
but that'll be a fun one to hear. And I'm using instruments like the gongs and also harp and piano in very resonant ways, very sort of satisfying to hear, a lot of ringing tones and sort of pleasant textures,
Yeah.
which is something that's not, you don't find in traditional symphonic music as much.
Right.
There's a little bit of influence there of world music,
Mhm.
Asian music and other kinds of sounds.
Tell us all a little bit about your composition process. I mean, I know a little bit about it because I
Right.
was involved throughout. But
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about.
You mean
kind of?
in
Well, how do you
this
start?
particular piece?
Yeah, this particular. Well, tell us not just this, but the whole from the get-go of okay, we want to do one of your pieces. Then what happens?
Yeah. Well, I typically I just start a texture. I'll write a chord progression or a rhythmic pattern, and ideas start. I just start following the ideas to where they go. And at some point, I step back and then, start shaping it, cutting off things that don't work, shortening things, lengthening things, and putting it together. I guess it's probably like writing a novel, where you start with a setting, some characters, and then you have the drama, the crisis, but then at any point you can go through and clean up certain parts, and,
right,
make certain sections.
Right. But actually, what I think is more interesting is that you were training for a triathlon while you were writing this piece.
Right.
And so you were like composing as you were on your bike.
Yep, biking and running, thinking about the music, even in the pool, swimming. Yeah.
I think that's pretty neat. Brahms wrote a lot of his music in the summertime when he was on the lake.
Right.
And he would go out and take walks, and then he'd come back in and write down what he thought about it. So you instead you were.
Yeah, you create a problem when you try to compose music or do anything creative. You actually create problems, and in the solving of those problems is where the piece is finished, or sections of the piece are finished.
Yeah.
And so I might spend an hour actually putting notes on paper, but then I might spend the next 4 hours or 6 hours while I'm riding my bike thinking about what should happen next, and listening in my head for directions. Occasionally, I would actually get off my bike, pick up my cell phone, call my office, and sing an idea.
That's great.
So that I could pick it up later when I had time to see if it worked.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So it's not the triathlon symphony or something.
No, there's just it's definitely influenced by that, but
Right.
no, there's no.
So let's talk about just a little bit of the practical aspects of this, because you worked for months.
Right.
Months and months on this, and you have your score. Show the score here. So, you've got the full score. It's the full orchestra is playing. So you come up with all of these ideas, and then you array them, you structure them, you array them for the whole orchestra. So we're sitting here in the Cascade.
Right.
Now we're still a little ways off of the first rehearsal for this piece, but once we get going, do you anticipate that you'll be doing any revising, or it's such a short process of actually putting the piece up that there's not a lot of time between the rehearsals and the performance?
Right. I think most reasonable composers would expect that at least certain aspects, there'll be a few things that they may have misjudged, particularly dynamics and balancing, and I am completely willing to do those things.
And those are very easy to
do. I don't know. I will let my ears be the judge there. I've had help, just a little bit of help throughout the symphony, where I've been able to, give percussion parts to Dwayne Corbin and give violin parts to other players, and sort of run things by professional musicians.
Right.
So I'm not expecting.
So something's not unplayable.
Absolutely.
It's a matter of just sort of hearing it come together in a space.
One thing that I was saying earlier was this symphony, I really tried to write, I believe I wrote very expressive parts. So they're not challenging in the technical aspect, but they're going to require musicians who are very sensitive and very musical, and I think that's something that we have in the North State Symphony.
We do.
So it's going to be a chance for them to sort of step up and draw on their years of experience as musicians.
Now, I told you before you were finished with the piece, I think, what pieces it was going to get paired with on a concert. Did that have any impact? We'll be playing this piece we'll be opening with music from Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream, and then we'll play your symphony. And then the second half of the concert, we're going to be doing the Barber Violin Concerto, which is, it's a centennial year for Barber, and of course he's also, he's a modernist who wrote music that's very listenable and accessible.
Correct. And in some ways, Mendelssohn with his orchestration was actually modern in his time.
That's true.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You have a 19th century, a 20th century, and a 21st century piece.
Right.
But they really, and they're all three different genres. You have an overture, a symphony, a concerto.
Right.
Very interesting because they're each in a different genre. But I think they fit together quite well.
I think so.
And strangely have enough similarities in the triadic language and the sounds that are familiar that I think it's going to go together very well.
Great. Well, I'm very excited about this. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I think the audience is really going to like it. I've heard just the kind of computer rendering, and I think it's an exciting piece.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for being here, and we'll look forward to the performance.
Sounds great.